John Lennon and Yoko Ono were married in 1969. They remained virtually inseparable, with one major exception. Late 1973, John Lennon moved out of his home and lived with May Pang. She was a young woman who had been to Lennon's personal assistant. What would you say to people who would say, you are capitalizing, you're making money off John Lennon?
I think it's very important that people understand that time that nobody knew. And really, I'm coming out to really tell the truth and to straighten out a bit of history, which have been written in the past, but it's been inaccurate. And I don't want other people to write my story.
My name is May Pang, and this is my story. I'm a first-generation Chinese American. I grew up in New York City's Spanish Harlem.
Tell your story.
I wasn't black. I wasn't Puerto Rican. I was a minority among minorities. My parents had a hard life. They left China to live the American dream. Because I was a girl, my father, in true Chinese tradition, adopted a son and abandoned me. He made me feel unwanted. My mother had beauty, and she had brains. She opened up her own Chinese laundry, and not knowing much English, she named it the OK Laundry.
Little bitty pretty one, come on and talk to me. Lovey one, come sit on my
Dad was an atheist, and Mom was a Buddhist, so naturally they sent me to Catholic school. Dad fought with Mom. I fought with the nuns. So my only escape was music. While all other kids in the neighborhood were dancing to Tito Puente, Joe Cuba, or James Brown, I was hooked on rock and roll, especially these four guys from Liverpool.
The hottest musical group in Great Britain today is the Beatles. It's anybody's guess why the Beatles emerged from its cellar nightclubs to national prominence.
Ringo has a sexy nose.
They've sold 2.5 million records and they earn $5,000 a week.
Have you ever been this crazy about any other entertainer?
No, and that's what's so amazing. We don't know why we're like this.
The London Times has carried the sobering report that the Beatles may bring their Mersey sound through the United States.
Picture of it now is there was a ship going to discover the new world, you know? And the Beatles were in the crow's nest, and we just said, land ho! And we went somewhere.
As for me, I was going nowhere, stuck at home with my abusive father. My mother was my inspiration to get up and get out of the neighborhood, to be an independent woman. I graduated Catholic school. I hated college. I hated going to school. So at 18, I dropped out. I jumped on the subway. I wanted to go look for a job. Next stop, Times Square. I was scared to death. I met a girlfriend at a big midtown office building, 1700 Broadway. She looked at the directory and said, "Do you realize Apple Records is here?" I said, "The Apple Records? The Beatles' Apple Records?" Well, guess what? I'm gonna go up and ask them for a job.
Anybody else coming in?
From the minute I got off the elevator, the place was busy. I found this woman sitting behind the desk.
This lovely person stood in front of me, introduced herself. She was willing, she was ready, she was a self-starter. She spoke for herself very well at age 19.
And I asked, "I'm looking for a job. Are there any openings?" She said, "Can you type?" "Yes." "Can you file?" "Absolutely." "Can you handle the phones?" "Of course," I said. "Yes." I was lying through my teeth. But the next week, I was in the music business. Sadly, by this time, my favorite group was History.
And from London comes a report that musician Paul McCartney has left the Beatles, according to a front-page article in the Daily Mirror.
The event is so momentous that historians may one day view it as a landmark in the decline of the British Empire. The Beatles are breaking up.
You had to either be a Beatle and do nothing else. Beatle take up your whole life. That was the problem with it. I mean, it grew into a monster. The Beatles was a period of my life, you know. I've got a long time to go.
After John married Yoko Ono, they left London for America in 1971.
I came over to America and just decided that I'd like to live here. And Yoko always going on to me about New York. So the next minute we thought, hey, well, let's stay, you know, isn't it great?
When they came to New York, Apple assigned them the youngest rock and roller in the office, me.
Hi. Hi. Hey.
How did it start? Where'd you meet?
I was working for Alan Klein, who was managing John at the time, and him and Yoko came into town to make 2 movies.
I was so young and naive, I didn't even know what avant-garde meant. The first film was called Up Your Legs Forever. Over the next 3 days, celebrity after celebrity were paid $1 each to drop their pants for peace. John and Yoko went last and showed a little more.
Everyone went silent when we did it, you know, it's just, what are their legs like?
Up Your Legs Forever by Yoko Ono. Directed by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Production assistant Zinar Kota, Tom Balasari, and May Pang.
It was my first credit. The second movie was called Fly. Dan Richter, an old friend of Yoko's, coordinated the shoot.
A woman is lying naked on a bed by an open window. A fly flies in the window, lands on her body, on her naked body, walks around, and then flies out the window. That's the script.
I couldn't understand why she was so still. Then they told me. I wished they hadn't told me.
We tested a bunch of people, and we finally found a woman who happened to be a heroin addict. And we found that if we gave her a little heroin, she wouldn't move very much. John and Yoko always need people. They're doing things all the time, so they need support people and people to go get stuff. And so Mae was, you know, in sort of coordinating things.
They asked me to catch flies in the dead of winter. The only place I could think of was a kitchen of a Chinese restaurant.
We had an enormous number of flies. In fact, the credits are almost as long as the film because there's so many people catching flies.
John and Yoko returned to England, and I went back to my desk job. But then came a wonderful surprise. I guess Yoko really liked me. I guess. Because 2 weeks later, I was on my way to magical London. Their home was called Tittenhurst Park in Ascot. It was like stepping into a giant 19th century painting. I certainly had come a long way from Spanish Harlem. Tittenhurst was where I first met Julian, John's son with his first wife, Cynthia. He looked at me and he goes, "Mae, would you like to get in the golf cart? I'll give you a ride." And I thought, oh, how sweet. I didn't think he was going to take me for a terror ride.
Well, I think any excuse to, you know, be a little cheeky and cause a little trouble, and I was up for that. So, yeah, I do remember taking Mae on the golf cart. I'm not sure whether that was the occasion that I drove it into a tree or not, but that was a lot of fun back then, going to a place like Tittenhurst and then seeing all these people in this mad house, and it was a very, very unique situation.
It sounds so corny to say that every day was a crazy adventure, but it was. Our first project was a photo shoot for their new album. Fashion photographer David Bailey was famous for his shots of swinging London and all the top celebrities, and he actually asked me to get in the picture. I found the whole thing quite terrifying, yet it was also incredibly glamorous. The next day was even more exciting as the crew set up to film John and Yoko's new song. I did the clothes. I put all the clothes on him. I made them look good. Let's put it that way.
Yoko said to John, "When you sing, I want to hold your hand." People all over the world are hearing that. Why don't you say something important?
Then John began playing the first chords on the piano. It just sent a chill because it was so simple and it was so beautiful. That's when I heard Imagine for the first time.
Imagine all the people living for today.
I realized they wanted people to understand it was more than just a song. It was a message for a better world.
The only answer for me, if there is any answers to anything, is love.
When we returned to New York, John and Yoko asked me to leave APCO and become their full-time assistant.
Hey, ¿qué pasa? Cos'è ese place? ¿Qué pasa?
I was thrilled.
What time does that say? I can't even see it.
We immediately took over a whole floor at the elegant St. Regis Hotel. I felt like I was living someone else's life.
He broke the lights. That's what happens at 1:45.
The Dick Cavett Show. Tonight with special guests, John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Let it down, mate.
Let us know when you're through voting.
That's me, in the bag talking to Dick Cavett. We were trying to make a point. You can't be prejudiced against someone you can't see.
And are you a lady?
Yes, I am.
Would you hold where you are for just a moment? Just stay where you are. I'm offering you a glass of water.
I don't drink water.
You don't drink water?
You look very nice.
Yes, you're looking a little pale, but very nice.
Well, what kinds of things would you do on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, how about the grocery shopping, taking care of everything? Working in the studio. I was their production assistant, doing clothes, doing the publicity, answering the phones.
John hadn't spoken with his son for 2 years. When one day, I took a call from Julian. He said,
"I'd like to speak
to my dad. But all calls had to be vetted first by Yoko.
This is Yoko.
So I said, Julian's on the line. The first words out of her mouth was, "You gotta get rid of the call. This call never happened." And I was just really taken aback to go into that call and say, "I'm sorry, your father's not here." Julian again called back a week or two later, and again, I wasn't allowed to put the call through. And finally, at one point I said, "Yoko, it's Julian again." And she said, "You can put the call through, but if John should ask you, is this the first time he's called? You say yes." I buzzed John. "Julian's on the line." And he said, "Is this the first time he's called?" And I said, yes, I had to lie. But what could I do? Yoko was my boss, but then so was John. So I lied to John, and I lied to Julian, and it hurt. Yoko was using me, simple as that. And not for the last time.
Yoko sat in that very chair.
A few weeks later, George Harrison invited me to another taping of the Takavich show.
I saw the show, it was very nice.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one thing they forgot to plug, so I thought I'd plug it for them, and that's their new Christmas record. We wish you Merry Christmas, war is over. Get yours now.
John and Yoko were passionately opposed to the Vietnam War. They understood that they could use their celebrity to advance world peace.
I always wanted to write something that would be a Christmas record that would last forever.
They plastered the declaration, "War is over if you want it," on billboards all over the world, from Paris to London to here in Times Square.
What we wanted to do was have something besides White Christmas being played every Christmas, you know?
So this is Christmas.
John invited a children's group, the Harlem Community Choir, to sing with him on his revolutionary new holiday carol, "Happy Christmas, War is Over." I was so excited to sing on this track, and for the first time, I made it onto the singles cover. Right there, next to Phil Spector, of all people. That year, I got a pretty cool Christmas card from the Lennons. They opened my mind to things I never thought about before. It was the beginning of my own political awakening.
I have an idea of how to get politics across to the people, is to change the apathy that all the youth have. Our job now is to tell them that there is still hope and we still have things to do. It isn't over just because flower power didn't work. It's only the beginning.
I like Give Peace a Chance for what it was. I think one of the highest moments was hearing all those people in Washington when the whole anti-war group was singing it. That was an emotional moment for me.
At the White House, John was labeled an enemy of the people, an angry, anti-war radical.
I read somewhere that the war movement was over.
And a threat to President Nixon's re-election.
When somebody in show business comes and participates in a political rally, he or she is doing something that is a very great personal sacrifice and even a personal risk.
It was obvious. Nixon wanted John out of the country.
Do you think that you will be deported?
I've no idea. Maybe it's just a process. I don't know.
When I walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't believe the scene outside.
You don't think there's any possibility that the government is trying to harass the Lenin?
Absolutely not.
He was a high-profile figure, and his activities were being monitored.
Oh, yeah, they picked on me. I'm telling you, when it first started, I was followed in the car, and my phone was tapped, and I think they wanted me to know, to scare me, and I was scared, paranoid.
Just when things couldn't get worse, they got a lot worse. Nixon was re-elected in a landslide. John and Yoko decided it was time to leave the radical hotbed of the village, as the government called it, to find something more safe and secure. They chose a sprawling apartment in the legendary Dakota on Central Park West.
You know, it's secure. People can't get in and say, I'm Jesus from Toronto.
Changing addresses didn't solve their problems.
Just one thing was going wrong after another. John didn't take it very well at all. The critics panned the album. The critics panned the concert, basically hated it.
George and Ringo's solo career were skyrocketing, and John and Paul, they were feuding.
He also said the Beatles were bastards, and he didn't miss the Beatles.
When we were together, everybody's talking as if it was wonderful all the time, and all the press and everybody and the people all saying how great and wonderful, but it wasn't like that at all.
They were so busy being John and Paul, they failed to realize who else was around at the time.
We don't want to be the crazy guy when we're 50, you know. Here they are again, yesterday, all night.
All of this took a toll on their marriage, and one drunken night, Yoko heard John having sex with another woman.
And then suddenly they started to make love, and I was just sitting, frozen.
After that, everything seemed to be falling apart. I've been John and Yoko's personal assistant. But now, I was convinced I was about to lose my job.
I came to work one morning, and Yoko walked into my office at the Dakota and said, John and I are not getting along, and I know he's going to start seeing other people, and I think I want you to go out with him, because I know he needs someone nice like you. And it just sort of snapped me back into reality, and I said, excuse me? I want you to understand, I didn't start this. And she said, no, I know that. We've been having problems.
And you were a 22-year-old secretary at the time, right?
Right. I've been working for them about two and a half years at that point.
How'd you feel when she asked you to have an affair with her?
I was stunned. I didn't know what to expect. I said, are you kidding? I can't do that. He's my employer, he's my boss. I said, he's your husband. And she says, no, it's okay. You should go and do it.
I want you to go out with him. I know you'll be nice. I know he likes you. You'll go out with him. I said, no. And she said, yes, you will. And she got up and walked out of the room.
How does this come about?
You know, I was a naive kid. I was very, very young at that point. You know, she started telling me all sorts of things. You'll be fine. And I said, no, I don't want to. That's your husband. She says, no, I want you to go out with him.
She ordered you to have an affair with her husband.
Yeah, she thought it was the best thing since I didn't have a boyfriend.
Of course, Yoko had her own version of what happened. When Yoko decided to interview, well, Yoko.
Is it true that you arranged the love story between John and his assistant, May Tan? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was an arrangement. It was convenient for John to have an assistant, and she was a very good assistant, a very capable person.
I really didn't think it was part of the job. I got a little freaked out. I didn't understand what was coming. She had some weird ideas before, but this topped it.
You had no romantic feelings for John.
Not at the time.
Yoko knew that John was going to start fooling around on her.
Right.
Yoko knew she could control you.
That's true.
Yoko picked the safe choice. Here, John, go have some fun with May, knowing that she could reel him back in anytime she wanted to.
She was, as you paint her, Yoko Ono, trying to control the affair, control John, control you. And she continued to encourage you.
Right.
Yoko set it up, John's wife.
She actually virtually insisted.
Why did you do it?
John, in the end, pursued me.
We started to spend a lot of time together at the studio, alone. He began to flirt and pay more attention to me.
When we got into the elevator when we were going to the recording studio, he turned around and he grabbed me and he kissed me. And I said, just stand over there. I said, don't do this to me. And he said, because I've been waiting to do this all day.
I've been asked 1,000,000 times, what happened? What changed since you told Yoko no? Well, what happened was John.
Which one you girls want me to hold you?
He looked me in the eye. He whispered in my ear. And then he kissed me. And before I knew it, John Lennon charmed the pants off of me. After we made love, I started to cry. What does this mean? He said, I don't know. Next morning, John called me into his office and did something that really surprised me. He opened up his guitar case and said, I want you to hear something. All right. Just like a willow tree.
Just like a willow tree.
A breath of spring, you see.
A breath of spring, you see.
She gets me through this god-awful loneliness.
She gets me through this god-awful loneliness.
I knew how much John meant to me. Up until that moment, I didn't realize how much I meant to John. John and I spent nights together. And every morning I would go to the Dakota and see Yoko. It was not a comfortable situation for me. This myth that Yoko sent us to LA to be together is nothing but a myth. But what really happened, one day John said, we gotta get out of New York, May. Just the two of us, away from Yoko. The whole thing was so spontaneous. We talked at noon, and at 6 p.m., we were at the airport. And that's how the lost weekend really began.
I'm gonna take you on a trip so far from here.
When John came out to California with May, it was that scared the shit out of both of them. Not to spend money.
What about John's money problems? I understand that it was all tied up in litigation.
We were on an allowance of $3,000 a month. Each Beatle was given $3,000 a month until everything was settled. And it wasn't a lot because he had two households to take care of, one in New York and one here in Los Angeles.
On top of that, Yoko cut off my salary. The minute we landed at LAX, we had very little, but we didn't care.
And we acted like kids, little teenagers running around.
Always knew that somebody would pick up the tab or give him a place to stay because he was, quote, John Lennon.
In Bel Air, where all the Hollywood celebrities live, we borrowed a house from record producer Lou Adler.
I've got 2 tickets in my pocket now, baby. We're gonna disappear.
We loved taking pictures of each other.
I've got 2 tickets to paradise. Won't you pack your bags, we'll leave tonight. I've got 2 tickets to paradise. I've got 2 tickets to paradise.
John had a funny way of letting me know when he was in the mood.
People ask me how John was as a lover. Okay. John was great. He was my friend. He was definitely the closest friend I had at that time, you know, and he, as a lover, he was my teacher.
John's doodle is a perfect illustration of our morning ritual. Wake up, cock-a-doodle-doo. Then afterwards, cock-a-doodle-don't. Although, with him it was all the time.
Does that answer it?
I came to realize that when John was a Beatle, he only saw America from an airport, back of a limo, inside a hotel room, or performing on a stage. So John wanted to do Vegas like any ordinary tourist. We checked into Caesar's Palace and had a blast. That's where we met up with Tony King, head of A&R for Apple Records.
I found a marvelous picture, all having dinner in Las Vegas. And there's a picture of May and he and Mike Hazelwood and I having dinner in the in the Chinese restaurant, and he looks great.
John was more and more relaxed, and our relationship was changing and growing. On the way back to LA, we saw this sign, Calico Ghost Town. And John's going, yeah, let's go. For John, it was freedom. It was for him to enjoy himself for once. Nobody knew it was John. He was there like everyone else, a tourist. In between, when we were walking around, John spotted this bike, a Harley-Davidson trike. He kept staring at it, and finally I said, why don't you go and stand by the bike? I took one shot, and on top of that, he's wearing my jeans. A few weeks later, on my 23rd birthday, John wrote me a card. Happy birth, Pang. Then he surprised me with the biggest and fastest present I ever got. John bought me a beautiful orange-red Barracuda. We took it out for a spin. Look at John's doodle. It tells you what he thought about my driving.
I'm singing, help, help.
Later that afternoon, we filmed a commercial for John's new album, Mind Games.
101A, take...
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Majesty, the Queen.
That's our friend Tony King as the Queen of England.
Good evening. I've been asked to do this commercial. It relates to a gramophone record, Mind Games, by John Lennon.
Oh, dear Her Majesty, what have you done?
At one point, John lifted up Tony's dress, goosing him. I snapped a picture. Don't you know it? It became our Christmas card. We signed as a couple, John and May.
And that was when he met Elton.
Tony was sure his two friends would hit it off, and he was so right.
I got a close up.
No, really, I man.
It was great. John said to me afterwards, isn't Elton a sweet person?
I got to celebrate my birthday with my John, Elton John, and the Queen of England. It was the best birthday of my life. Tony King made a great queen, a great friend, and gave John great advice.
Just let people know that you're around and you're okay. You know how likable you are. The people have felt up until now that you've been rather an angry, radical type of person. Well, John, what you should do is get yourself known by people again and do some interviews to the American trade, you know.
John loved the water, so his first TV interview was at the beach in Malibu.
Just a fish head.
Go away, go away.
I watched as he returned to his old, witty, playful self.
Testing
Watch
1,
your
2,
shadow, mate.
3, 4, 5,
Just
6,
don't
7.
talk to you.
You never seem to ever really get away from your political experiences. Do you find you're becoming more and more political as life goes on in your music and your personal life, or less political?
I just change every 5 days.
When you think back during that period of time known as Beatlemania, do you miss it?
We all had basically had enough, and nobody knew how to say it. And, you know, that's why I say maybe we should have finished it a bit sooner.
John was opening up more to me, to friends. He even invited journalists over to our home.
We started to do things that he hadn't done before, like interviews. Invariably, people were basket cases before they got to the house. They couldn't believe that they were actually going to meet John Lennon.
What qualities do you think you had that attracted John? What was it that he was looking for?
I really, I've said a lot of different things, and I think we shared a lot of interest together, especially music. We can talk about rock and roll, because I was a real rock and roller. I mean, I am a real rock and roller at heart.
Well, the rock and roll album, folks.
Started in '73 after I'd finished Mind Game, and so I thought, I know,
I'm always in between takes, and with the Beatles too, we'd always jam those songs. You know, they're my favorite songs. Kind of have some fun instead of all this writing my feelings in these songs, you know. John Lennon writes new song. Is it about him or is it about Paul? Or... So I thought, I know, who shall I use? You know, the great Phil Spector.
All right, one of the greatest actions of all time history, and here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Jim Keltner. He was an awesome drummer. John used him on all his albums.
We got with Spector to make a Phil Spector type of record with John. Great rock and roll covers.
For the first time, he wanted to be just a singer in the band.
All right, I just want to sing. I don't want to know nothing about nothing. So we started the sessions, and they went well.
John was the star, but Phil Spector, he was the boss.
Hey, we got the man here.
What man?
Any fucking man. Let's go.
Phil was the master of the evening.
I remember the bass drum also on that, after that, you know, the ending.
It would start off great, feeling great, sounding great. John would be fantastic, but in those 2 or 3 hours, everybody just would be drinking and, you know, doing everything, smoking and everything. So it would be just crazy.
Phil was definitely out of control.
I can't read this writing.
What is that bleeding bird out there?
It definitely got crazy. You know, there was 28 guys playing a night, and 15 of them were out of their minds, including me. And the sessions broke down.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Really bomb, you know. I'm not even going to say what happened. Some of it was ridiculous.
You can't yell 4 over his playing.
Please accept my fall. It's the only way I can come in.
It's through fall.
Then they gradually collapsed into mania, you know. It's one way of putting it.
Oh my God, Phil Spector just shot off his gun. If you're gonna shoot, shoot me. But don't fuck with me ears, man. I need them.
I'm gonna write your history, so be careful.
That's when the session ended, and God, the chaos began.
Phil told me to get in the Cadillac with John, and he was just screaming.
We raced back to the house.
He was screaming bloody murder.
Things didn't exactly improve when we got home. It actually got worse.
He went crazy in the house and destroyed everything.
So May was on the telephone. She was very hysterical when she was saying, "You've got to come over. John's going mad. He's acting like a madman in the house. He's smashing the place up."
Thank God, Tony arrived.
And there, at the doorstep, is John, screaming and shouting. The only way I knew how to handle it was I just went up and I put my arms around him. And he cried, instantly. He just broke down and wept.
Did he become physically abusive to you?
He did a couple of times, yeah.
Knock you around a bit?
He threw me against the wall.
The only things I regret in life are hurting myself and hurting somebody else.
He didn't remember the next day, and he apologized. He even cried about it.
You know, I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself, and I fought men, I hit women, but I am absolutely a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence.
Oh, she was treated badly. But you know what? She loved him so much, and she really knew that he was having a hard time, and she just cared for him, you know?
John was drinking a lot. Whether he remembered it or not, he pushed me hard. He was just out of control. Instead of apologizing, he turned away and said, "I don't think it's gonna work." He was breaking my heart. But I wasn't going to take it anymore. There was nothing else to say. I left for New York. I was able to keep it together all the way to New York City. Until I got home, what was I doing with my life? No job, no money. I didn't know what to think. Was my relationship with John over? Eventually, I called Yoko to tell her I was back in town. Yoko insisted. You have to go back to him right away. Cynthia and Julian are coming to LA. He can't deal with them by himself. He needs you. To do what? Make everything nice? I'm the girlfriend who's supposed to deal with the ex-wife, the current wife, the son of the ex-wife. And I don't even think I'm the girlfriend anymore. And then it occurred to me. John was trying to get me back. He couldn't ask me himself. He had to get Yoko to do it for him. I agreed to fly back to LA, just in time to be with John, when Julian and Cynthia arrived.
Where was son Julian all this time? He had some difficulties with that relationship, didn't he?
Yeah, he hadn't seen his son in 3 years, and he finally showed up here. He had felt so guilty not seeing him, and I was being in the middle trying to put that two together.
I hadn't seen him for a long, long time. I'd had the occasional phone call. I was scared. I just didn't know what I was going to come up against. And it was nerve-wracking for the first day or so. But with May being around, that eased any tensions that were there. I think May made that a lot easier for me as a young kid.
And he finally got a chance to see his son, and he said, my God, he's a little man. He can talk to me. And I said, yeah.
I recall, hanging out with May a lot at that point in time. She was very playful. We always had a smile on our face. We were always giggling and playing around. Even Dad seemed a lot lighter in himself and a lot happier in himself.
I became the official tour guide. I started taking more responsibility for our little group.
Especially the trip that we did to Disneyland. I mean, gone to heaven on that one. I still remember it fondly.
We snuck into the studio at the Paramount lot where we watched them film Happy Days.
I remember Happy Days very much, going to the set.
And we walked in, and they were like, oh my God, it's John Lennon. Julian flipped when we ran into a very young Jodie Foster.
And she was the same age as me, and I was a fan even then, and we had a picture taken. I think I still have the Polaroid.
John hadn't seen Cynthia in years. Since he walked out with Yoko, it was still hard for John to face her. But I was hoping they could find some kind of closure for Julian's sake.
May is a good friend of mine, always has been since we met. And we have a lot to thank May for. At a period in life when, we needed a bit of support.
I think that's when May and Mum sort of fast became friends. They got on very, very famously. They enjoyed each other's company all through the years. They understood each other very, very well. Yes, due to, I guess, the circumstance that they both found themselves in.
I made sure that every time that he talked to him also every week, that it would never lapse anywhere in between.
May understood, Dad's sensibilities dealing with his first young son and having not seen him for a long time.
When I look back, one of the things I am most proud of is helping to reunite Julian with his dad. Yoko called incessantly. She wanted a full report.
She was constantly calling every day, 10 calls a day, 15 calls a day. Hello? She always called us. Fine, she used to call me at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning, whatever hour.
Yoko never left them alone. May would say, oh, Yoko called again. And Major was very protective of John. She didn't feel threatened by Yoko.
Please welcome May Pang. She did not realize it was going to turn into such a big love affair. She thought it would be 2 weeks, gone, goodbye.
Why didn't the marriage break up? Why, or was it breaking up?
It was breaking up, and she even asked for a divorce, and she didn't expect the answer to come from John to say, okay, fine, let's do it. She realized that he meant it, that she said, oh, no, the stars aren't right.
she would have to find another way to manipulate him. On the other hand, John and I were having a great time.
That lost weekend that everybody keeps talking about, it wasn't so lost. People saw more of John than they had in the previous years, and he was out and about a lot. It was around this time John started hanging around with a new crowd, a notorious bunch of musicians known as the Hollywood Vampires.
Started in L.A. at the Rainbow Bar and Grill, where every single night it was Harry Nilsson, Alice Cooper, Bernie Taupin, Mickey Dolenz, Keith Moon if he was in town. John Lennon was an honorary member.
The last thing John needed was a membership to a drinking club, vampires or not.
And I was just hanging around with Ringo and Harry Nilsson and became like the teenage gang, only we were all 30.
May was able to kind of navigate all the different things that were going on, Yoko's phone calls, John's drinking and using during that period. And one of the reasons is she was the only one who wasn't using drugs and drinking. So, I mean, she had an edge over all of us.
I wasn't drinking. I don't drink and I don't take drugs. So what happened is when he got together with the guys and they would say, oh, let's go out and party. And I'm the one sitting there going, I didn't fit into that category.
It was a kind of rehash of my youth, acting like a teenager in Hollywood, in public.
John would always take himself to the extreme for anything.
I would do something dumb like put a Kotex on my head in a restaurant.
The day began with Yoko's usual morning call. All I heard was one side of the conversation. It started with, really? Really? And ended with, really?
Au revoir.
John looked at me. He was stunned. She slept with somebody. I said, I think it's her guitarist, David Spinoza. If you don't believe me, look at her album cover. He's definitely more prominent than you.
Her intention was, in effect, to keep John out of the picture so she can hit on the David Spinoza situation.
I had no interest at all, especially when I realized what it was. She wanted to produce a record and all that stuff. That'd be terrific. But as far as that other sexual thing, we were together and then we weren't. You know, my career's fine the way it is. I don't have to go down in rock history as guessing fuck Yoko Ono.
Later that night, we went to the famous Troubadour nightclub to hang out with Harry Nilsson. It was a pretty big comeback for the Smothers Brothers. They were just kicked off network television for getting too political. Around the table was Jack Haley Jr., Pam Grier, Peter Lawford. Even Paul Newman was in the house.
It was the first night I drank Brandy Alexander's, which is brandy and milk, folk.
Oh, he certainly drank them like milk.
And I was with Harry Nilsson, who didn't quite get as much coverage as me, the bum.
But anyway, he got drunk, and at one point, he just turned around and grabbed me. And he kissed me. And I'm actually struggling. No, I don't want anybody to know that we're together. And the next day, of course, it was all over the newspapers and then in Time magazine.
So I got drunk and got rowdy with a friend of mine, and I got thrown out of the club. Whoopee it. Well, I'm human, you know. I was drunk in Liverpool and smashed phone boxes, huh? It didn't get in the papers then.
And then Yoko called. Hello? And she said,
I know May wanted to do this.
And he goes,
No, it was me.
John wanted to tell the world that we were together. The day after the Troubadour, we attended the American Film Institute's tribute to James Cagney.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Cagney.
There were movie stars and paparazzi everywhere. Then John and I walked in.
It was a fun time. John and I were just looking at all these movie stars and going, oh, look who's there. There's Mae West and there's, and there's Paul Newman.
All of a sudden, we see this figure walking over in white, and it's Mick Jagger. Oh, God, we were like chess pieces. He was in total white, and we were in total black. Then, Ron Galera, famous for stalking Jackie Kennedy with his camera, captured us in public as a couple.
She gained so much strength during that time. Her self-confidence changed completely. She was becoming confident about who she was. She was just beautiful. When she walked in a room, you couldn't miss her because these long legs kind of took off across the room.
John gave me confidence to express myself. I wasn't just walking behind anymore. We were the center of attention wherever we went.
They were seen around town. They did things. That was not the way he had been in New York. So it was a much more social life than he'd been living.
To escape the attention, we took a road trip to Palm Springs with Harry Nilsson. But while we were there, bad news. Phil Spector was holding the rock and roll tapes hostage, and he wasn't letting go. Harry suggested, "Hey, John, why don't you produce an album for me?"
I was just hanging out with guys, and all we were doing was getting drunk and, waking up, sick. So that's why I said to Harry, let's forget this, let's do something.
So John had this great idea. He invited the musicians to work on Harry's album and to stay together in one place. He chose a house on the Pacific Coast Highway with a famous history.
Gotta get up, gotta get out, gotta get home before the morning comes. What if I'm late? Gotta be...
The minute you walked in the front door, you got the story. Marilyn Monroe met both Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy here and rendezvoused with both of them. And of course, her ghost just stayed there. It felt like it.
I had Keith Moon, Harry Nilsson, and Ringo. All these people living in a house on the beach, formerly where Kennedy and Marilyn had been.
John liked the idea of making love in the same bed as JFK and Marilyn Monroe.
And we rented this house. I thought, get them all in one house and they'll behave themselves. It was the wrong thing to do.
I arranged all the sessions, made sure everything ran smoothly.
Harry, John, and I were listening to playback. I was facing the door, which suddenly opened, and I mouthed to John, "It's Paul and Linda." John turned, as if he had spoken to him that morning, and said, "Hey, Paul." Paul asked, "Is the session over?" "Yeah, but we're about to jam. Want to join?" And in that moment, 5 years of animosity and anger simply disappeared.
I jammed with Paul. I did actually play with Paul, yeah. We did a lot of stuff in LA.
McCartney's doing the harmony on the drums.
Stevie Wonder came in from the studio next door.
Stevie might get on it there if he's got a mic. Hey, Steve!
But there was 50 other people playing too, and they're all just watching me and Paul, yeah.
Linda joined in on organ. Mal Evans, the original roadie for the Beatles, and me, we grabbed the tambourines, and the fun began.
Hands up who doesn't know Stand By Me. When the night has come. Can you hear me in the control room? Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Hey, just keep turning my earphones off. I can't hear a fucking thing.
This was the last time John and Paul ever played together. The next day, Paul and Linda came over to the beach house.
This was really great. This was LA crazy, right up there. Harry Nielsen, who was a lovely, lovely boy, but went to excess. Keith Moon, another lovely boy, but again went to excess. John, same kind of thing. And the whole team of them making this record in LA.
May told me, oh, Paul's coming over. Paul and Linda are coming. And that was a big deal at that time because there had been a lot of animosity between them, especially John and Paul. And Ringo was there too. That was the first time that John and Paul were actually going to sit down and have civilized talk without lawyers present.
When I saw them together, finally, I thought, this is quite a moment. I snapped this picture. Little did I know that Paul was here to deliver a message from Yoko.
I'd been asked by Yoko, Linda and I were asked by Yoko, take a message to John. I'll see if he's interested. She took him in the back room like a sort of elder brother, almost. Sort of said, you know, I'm the go-between. Do you still love Yoko? Do you want to get back with her? Here's how you do it. And just gave him what Yoko had said.
You would have to come back to New York. He can't live with me immediately. You would have to call me, ask me out. Say, I want the romance. So you'll have to send me flowers. You'll have to do it all again.
I don't think that John or May gave in to her.
John didn't appreciate being told what to do. He wasn't interested in Yoko's terms and conditions. He simply said, I'm with May. And I thought this relationship might have a real future without Yoko.
That's when I straightened out in the middle of that album. That's when I realized there's something wrong here. You know, this is crazy, man. So then I suddenly was the straight one in the middle of all these mad, mad people. I suddenly was not one of them, you know. And I pulled myself back and finished off the album best I could, you know. So then after that, I came home to New York.
While I closed up things in LA, the boys took their act to New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Lennon, everybody, Harry Nielsen. Ladies, John, can you give us the whereabouts of the other men? Where are they today?
Just like Ringo in Los Angeles. John is in the studio in England, and Paul was here last week and left.
John called me every night. He couldn't believe the reception he got in Central Park. He told me, come home, May. I actually began to think our relationship had survived the so-called lost weekend. I returned to New York. To my great relief, I found John clean and sober.
By then, I'd straightened myself out. I was straight and, you know, no drink.
John decided we should move in together. We ended up finding the perfect apartment. Can you imagine? I was 23, and my first live-in boyfriend was John Lennon. We had a view of the East River, which reminded John of the Mersey in Liverpool.
I remember the apartment very well. It was a really small apartment. It wasn't Tittenhurst, no. It was on the top floor, I believe, and very steep stairs. The view was amazing. It was like being in a little bit of a castle on top of the building, overlooking New York and the river. It was a very, very special little spot.
We took the bedroom, and we fixed up the guest room for Julian.
Everything. People are always looking at people like me, trying to see some secret, or what do they do? What do they do? You know, do they go to the bathroom? Do they eat? Do you? I do, quite a lot.
It was an absolute joy and a pleasure. It was just Dad and May, and it was just a happy, happy time. Especially in some of the photographs, you can see that May took of us, of Dad and I together.
We even had cats, Major and Minor, which John named after the black and white keys on the piano. As an actual New Yorker, I showed John around the real New York.
Yeah, I love it, you know. I mean, people just say hi or, you know, what's cooking, and a few people ask for autographs, but mainly they just sort of wave or shake your hand, and I get about and I go to eat, and I'm enjoying all the things I couldn't do for 10 years, you know?
I seem to be the guy in New York that all the Englishmen say hi to, you know. Which is good, you know. If Mick's in town, Paul's in town, anybody comes, I love it, you know.
Paul McCartney used to stay, come over to our house, and Ringo and George and Elton.
All these people had their best times with John when he was with May. And Mick has acknowledged that was when John was with May was the time that he got to really see him. You know, everybody saw John when he was with May.
A funny bit, we were trying to get in touch with Paul and Linda for dinner. We didn't reach them. We left them a message. And as we're coming up 61st Street in the cab, we look over into the other cab, and it's Paul and Linda. And all of a sudden, we yell out, and the two Beatles, right, John and Paul, stick their heads out and they're screaming at one another, saying, "I'll talk to you later." And as the car's moving, they split. And it was wild to see that.
John's favorite place in our apartment was out on the balcony. And that's where I took a picture of Bob Gruen taking his famous picture.
I remember Dad and May showing me where they were on the rooftops and they'd seen the UFO. Loved the story and the idea that that happened.
We saw a UFO one night, and there were two of us standing nude looking at this thing with no noise, nothing.
Over here, up there, I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river. And it looked dark, like black or gray in the middle, and had white lights, just looked like light bulbs, you know? Just going off, on, blink, 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 round the bottom.
John grabbed an envelope and scribbled a picture that looked exactly like what we saw. Well, almost. John immortalized the sighting in this liner note, and it became part of his legend.
When I was with John, it was the most productive year that he had musically.
I always was a record man, you know. I mean, I liked the studio always best once I got the hang of it and the control of it.
Jammed with Mick Jagger. Worked with Ringo. Elton John. David Bowie. Produced Harry Nilsson. That's a few things, right?
One thing I loved the most was being in the recording studio, doing production work with John. I earned production credits on some major albums.
I even sang backup on Number 9 Dreams.
We had met David Bowie through Elizabeth Taylor.
And next minute he says, "Hello, John, I'm doing Cross the Universe. Do you want to come on down?" We sort of made this lick into a song is what happened.
Backwards piano. And a couple of things like repeat of Fame.
Fame became Bowie's first #1 hit and the beginning of my special friendship with David. John wrote the song Goodnight Vienna with Ringo in mind. So we flew to Los Angeles for the recording and film shoot.
During this time, of course, I'm sure May's told you, he was very, very close, in close contact again with Ringo. Yeah.
I'm more pleased that Ringo's doing well.
Ringo's very non-judgmental as well. He let John go through all that shit that John went through without criticizing him. Ringo just loved him, you know?
Is that Ringo Starr advertising his new album Goodnight Vienna on Apple Records and Tapes?
It certainly is, John.
Wow, you look so wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
It's a pleasure, Ringo.
Making music with his friends made John very happy. So did bonding with his son. John couldn't wait for Julian to come visit us again. Imagine, our visits to Long Island Sound were some of the happiest times we had together. It touched my heart watching father and son growing closer.
I was very, very happy. I think that's probably where my love of water and sailing and boating comes from.
We are a rock revolving around a golden sun. We are a billion children rolled into one.
I had a fabulous time. I mean, you can see in the film, happy as a clam, smiling and laughing and having a good time.
But there was always a dark cloud hanging over our heads, the danger that John could be deported at any time.
Every now and then they'll say, you've got 30 days to get out, and then my lawyer will appeal them.
Accompanied by his lawyer, John Lennon showed up at Foley Square, virtually alone and unrecognized until waiting newsmen swarmed around him.
Your defense must be costing you a lot of money.
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
It will be.
And then, some good news.
Because of the Watergate matter, as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
At last, John could finally feel at home in America.
I like to be here because this is where the music came from. This is what influenced my whole life and got me where I am today, as it were. And I love the place. I'd like to be here. I've got a lot of friends here. This is where I want to be, you know? Statue of Liberty, welcome. I even brought my own cash.
With Nixon off his back, John was thrilled. I kept shooting when a BBC film crew captured John celebrating Manhattan. We were invited to the premiere of an off-Broadway musical based on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was a mob scene. We took our seats. And then, out of the blue, Yoko showed up. I whispered to John, "Do you want me to give up my seat?" He bluntly said, "No, have her sit in the back." Watching the stage, it was like a circus. It reminded me of the Magical Mystery Tour. They had all those crazy outfits. John turns to me and goes, "This is so fucking weird." Once the show was over, we ran right off to the party at the Hippopotamus Club.
I've got to be honest with you. The first time that I went to Hippo with John, we came in, sat down, fully expecting to see Yoko. And there was this young, pretty girl there, and I thought, oh, press agent, you know, with him. And then I really noticed that it was a little more than that. John was always attracted to strong women.
Sitting in the back of the theater didn't sit well with Yoko.
She told me, she says, "I'm thinking of taking John back." And I said, "What?" And she says, "I'm thinking of taking him back." She had no explanation. She said, "I think it's time."
At this point, John was determined to get back into the studio to complete the rock and roll album.
So I finished it off, and I played it round to a few people that weren't me. And they said, I played it at the record company. I didn't know what to do with it. I said, yeah, I don't know whether to release it even. You know, I've got it off my chest, I've finished it. And they all said, this is all right. It's all right, let's put it out. I said, it's all right, is it? Okay, we'll put it out.
He was a real media freak. He'd sit in front of the TV. He would have the music blaring, but the TV was on at all times.
One night we were cuddling in bed when John got the inspiration for a new song. We were watching late night television when all of a sudden the famous TV preacher, Reverend Ike, comes on.
If you're looking in by television, quickly reach and get a pencil or pen.
Grab the nearest paper sack if you have to.
John was mesmerized.
Everything you do, everything you want, whatever gets you through the night.
John kept repeating the phrase.
Whatever gets you tonight.
Reverend Ike's message became a hook for a new song. We went straight to the studio to record it. And who happened to show up? But Elton John.
He just popped into New York on his way through and walked in the studio and said, hey, can I put some piano on that? And I said, sure, go ahead. And then I said, look, while you're here, do you want to sing harmony?
From inspiration to creation to collaboration, I was proud to be a part of the journey. Then we set out on the biggest PR campaign in Capitol Records history.
You've been listening to John Lennon's new album, Walls and Bridges. Thank you, Ringo. It's a pleasure, John.
No, I wouldn't want to be so commercial as to hold up Walls and Bridges, #1 with a bullet, out now with a new single, #9 Dream, at your local store. Thank you. God bless you, and let's get on with business.
just did the business.
Oh, I did. Good, good.
To promote the album, we stopped at KHJ Radio in Los Angeles.
Good morning, Southern California. It's 6:19 and 62 degrees in Hollywood.
John was great at schmoozing with fans on the air.
I love the Beatles. Oh, so do I. Isn't that wonderful? Louise? Yeah? Every little breeze?
I love you so much.
And I love you.
Oh, let's get married.
Give me my green card.
We were then invited to the Caribou Ranch in Colorado to record with Elton.
I flew up on the way back to New York to Caribou and sang on the background of a single that Elton's put out called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
John suggested playing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds against a reggae beat.
Lucy in the sky with diamonds.
While we were there, we went shopping. John looked pretty good as a Liverpool cowboy. Whatever Gets You Through the Night became a #1 hit.
It was the first #1 I had, actually. I did not expect it to get to #1 at all. I didn't think it had a chance in hell.
Elton made a bet with John. If the single got to #1, he would have to perform live with Elton.
Well, I lived to get nervous about that. Came back and says, okay, it's time to pay your dues.
We got together in New York. It wasn't, and we talked about what we should do, and we had a rehearsal on Tuesday night.
John was dreading the performance. But he was a man of his word, and it was time to pay up. John hid his nerves by putting on Elton's glasses. And there were plenty of glasses to go around. That night, we took a limo to Madison Square Garden.
John was so nervous.
Nervous? He was nauseous.
That was Elton's big year. The year when that's your year. And his tour was unbelievable, and he couldn't believe it.
It had been so long since John had performed live, he didn't know how the audience would react.
Because he hadn't been on tour since 1966, when it was 4 amps on the stage.
Backstage, we sat waiting for John's cue.
Was more nervous than I was going on stage.
Seeing as Thanksgiving, we thought we'd make tonight a little bit of a joyous occasion by inviting someone up with us onto stage. And I'm sure he will be no stranger to anybody in the audience when I say it's our great privilege and your great privilege to see and hear Mr. John Lennon.
And the whole of Madison Square Garden shook. The ground was shaking, and all the limos were like bouncing up and down.
At John's request, I stood off stage where he would be sure to see me.
It was a magic evening. It's just one of those magical things. I mean, just completely blew my head off.
This would be John's last live public performance. After the concert, I found a card with familiar handwriting. And then I noticed Yoko talking to John.
And we just went to backstage. And John was sitting there. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. And I was smiling. It's just kind of smiling politely, or whatever you call it.
She came over. She sent them. She sent Elton and she sent John flowers for the show. She congratulated them, and that was it. And then we all went to the party afterwards.
Sportcaster Howard Cosell invited us to Monday Night Football.
Now I've got a most familiar figure and face for all of you across the country here with me now. Of the original Beatles, Mr. John Lennon.
Hello,
John,
Howard.
nice to see you, John.
Nice
Want
to
to
be
move
here.
that up just a little closer?
How are you?
What's been your view of this American professional football scene?
It's an amazing event and sight. It makes rock concerts look like tea parties. But I must say, the first thing I heard when I got in was I'm playing a Beatles tune yesterday, which cheered me up no end.
Will the Beatles ever reunite?
You never know. You never know. I mean, it's always in the wind. If it looked like this, it might be worth doing, right?
Ironically, 2 weeks later, at the Plaza Hotel, arrangements were made officially dissolving the Beatles.
Closing was scheduled at the Plaza Hotel, a big meeting room. Paul and Linda in the corner filming it, George walking around the table, and they're saying to me, "Where's John?" And I spoke with May initially, and she put John on the phone. They said, "John, where are you?" He said, "I'm not coming. The stars aren't right." I wasn't going to argue with him.
Yoko told him not to sign. The stars weren't right. We had a well-timed visit from Julian. The three of us escaped to Florida.
At Disney World, I was there on the most crowded day of the year, around Christmas or something. And people didn't bother me because I was just one in a million people. I was just crushed up. But seeing him is good, you know.
After a few days of unwinding, John finally sat down to sign the contracts. Linda McCartney had photographed Paul and George signing in New York. So John said to me, "May, get the camera. Be my Linda." And that's how the Beatles, who started at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, finally ended at Disney World. With a stroke of a pen, the Beatles were no more.
Off over to Times Square we go.
1975 got off to a great start. John and I were back in New York.
At one point, he asked me, he goes, I was thinking, I wonder what it'd be like if I started to write with Paul again. What do you think? And I said to him, I said, are you crazy? I said, it would be great.
But we might do bits together, we don't know yet. There's every chance we might just feel like getting together and doing something,
And the Beatles were back on the charts.
We all have albums, singles, everything. Zooming up the charts, folks. Isn't that nice? Separately, but together.
I was the anchor at WPVI TV in Philadelphia.
Well, Larry Kane from way back when.
Traveling with them with the Beatles was wonderful. John, more than anyone else, I remained in touch with. And we invited him to come down. And he said, can I go on TV with you? What would you like to do? He said, how about the weather?
And I think the weatherman's
under the weather.
I had a touch of Scranton when I was 16, but Scotland cured it. This is meant to be green, and this is the northwest wind, but if you do that, it falls off.
Go on.
Yes?
And it's great to have him in Philadelphia. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.
After the program was over, he was telling me about this romance he had with a beautiful young woman, May Patton, and he said that we fell in love, and it was really an idyllic life.
I was deeply in love with John. John often showed his affection with his drawings. He sketched my favorite animal, a gorilla, sweetly offering flowers and announcing, "I've come for May." And here he imagines himself floating peacefully through old age, pot-bellied and content, surrounded by his favorite things, his cat, his ciggies, his coffee. There I am, above the clouds, watching over our little house with John as the walrus. He seemed to be thinking of our future, and it looked like heaven on earth. Hey?
So everything was going great. What happened?
This is the toughest one. Yoko had claimed that there's this therapist that, can hypnotize him and help him quit smoking because he felt that his lungs were going short. He didn't hold the breath long enough when he sang. Yoko called up and says, John should come home. And all of a sudden, I got this horrible feeling. And I didn't want him to go. And he turned around on the staircase, and he looked at me, and he said, I'll come back early. Whatever restaurant you want to go, we'll go. And make the arrangement of going down to see Paul and Linda down in New Orleans, because you're going to love it. Because I had never been to New Orleans. He turned to me, gave me a kiss. He says, and I'll be back. And when he walked out the door, and the door slammed behind him, I had a strange feeling I wasn't going to see him back here again. So I didn't speak to him the whole weekend. I tried calling, and Yoko would say, he's sleeping, he's in session, everything but then to get him on the phone. So finally, about I don't know how many tries, I said, listen, you know how John doesn't like to miss a dental appointment. Please tell him he's got one on Monday. And we met there, and we stood outside, and I could see he looked different. He sounded different. And afterwards, I went in one direction. He was going in the other. And I said, where are you going? And he looked at me and he went, home. I said, well, home is this way, pointing in the direction I was walking. And then finally he came over to me and he said, listen, Yoko's allowed me to come home. Allowed? And I said, whose idea was this? She goes, really, nobody, just came up. So I knew that's not what he was thinking. The week and a half before, we were about to buy a house. We had gone out there, we even took Julian. We were about to buy a house in Montauk. The next 5 years, I saw John on and off. And often we were intimate. And I know it meant a lot to both of us. It had been about a little over a year since I had last seen John when he called out of the clear blue. We spent an hour and a half on the phone. I said, "Where are you?" He goes, "I'm in Cape Town." And I went, "South Africa?" He said, "We have to find a way for us to get together." Never would I have thought that would be the last time I would talk to him.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news from Poland, Iran, and Washington tonight. Former Beatle John Lennon, who was 40, was shot and killed outside his luxury apartment in New York. News of Lennon's death touched off a wave of shock and mourning around the world.
Devoted fans of John Lennon still gather at the site where the former Beatles star was murdered Monday night. Visiting overnight was Lennon's 17-year-old son, Julian, who flew in from London.
That Sunday, there was a little memorial, and I didn't want to come out, but Tony King and I decided to take a walk.
May meant something to John. She wasn't just a little scrubber that he picked up off the street. She helped him through a very difficult period of his life. She coped with a lot of shit. And she was a young girl, and her whole life was turned around as a result of this experience.
It never ended. And so when it didn't end, life ended it for me. What happened out there?
What is one of your fondest memories of May? Can you describe that?
The fact that she maintained such a great relationship with Mum. And the reason I got to see May a lot more, and I think the main reason I got to see May a lot more was because of Mum, you know. And
love you.
And I love you too. So, you know, that's, you know, one of the key things, I think, more than anything.
Yes.
Indeed. And look at us now, still
Yes,
here.
still here.
Still alive and kicking. Who would have thought?
When I look back at our so-called lost weekend, when I think about my whole relationship with John, I know I wasn't the only woman he loved. He loved Cynthia. He loved Yoko. And yes, he loved me.
The only answer for me, if there is any answers to anything, is love.